Happy Sunday! We are here. How glorious. My name is Dr. Crystal Wise. I am an assistant professor of literacy education at the University of Minnesota. Before I get started, I want to be sure to thank D'Angela for inviting me to speak today. Thank you. I've always loved this album, and it's really special to be able to talk about it. And thank you to you all who are participating. Thanks for joining. Like I said, I love this album, so this is exciting. And the title of my presentation is Blood, Bones, and Boxes, Prince's Resistance to Racism. I want to begin with a clip from the last date of the Act Two tour. It was September 7th, 1993 in London at Wembley Arena.
Cord wrapped around my neck. Epileptic to the age of 7. I was sure heaven marked the death. Still, I sacrificed. London! My name is not Prince. And my name damn sure ain't Victor.
This clip illustrates, as many of you all know, a transitional period in which Prince changed his name to his unpronounceable symbol. But here he is also denouncing previous affirmations of himself as Victor, and he leaves us to grapple with not only his transition, as he embodies the end of an era, his existence as Prince, but he is also signaling a contemplative state. He is facing the music. The phrase face the music means to accept or confront the inevitable, or the unpleasant consequences of one's actions. On Race, the sixth track of the Come album, Jolene Steele can be heard singing the phrase face the music, and Prince making commentary on race, his humanity, and racism. From a quick analysis, we can conclude that Prince is resisting social constructions of race by refusing to check any of the preset boxes. For those curious, this is the question on race that appeared in the 1990 U.S. Census form. Prince goes on to remind us that we are all human. We are all humans, as we will go to bones when we're dead. If we're cut, we bleed red. For some, this may be enough to honor or recognize the humanity in others who look different from them. However, in facing the music, that is the reality of race and racism in America. Black people, African Americans, know we are human. However, on American soil, it is inevitable that we will experience racism, whether we name it or not, whether we check Black or mark human. And so based on my knowledge of Camila also addressing race, I've decided not to further go into how Prince uses blood, bones, and boxes to resist racism, because I believe she's already covered it in her talk. So I will get us to what I am presenting, or the purpose of my presentation, which is that I am claiming that Prince's song Race is an important illustration of why racism should not be addressed ahistorically. And I situate this claim in the tradition of Black intellectual thought. We can turn to Dr. Pero Dagbovi's description of Black intellectual thought to see how the song Race is part of a Black tradition. Dagbovi writes that since its earliest expressions, those who have practiced Black intellectual history have, broadly speaking, been concerned with explaining how African American spokespersons have thought and written about their people's unique status, which has been primarily characterized by various forms of oppression. So yes, Prince, you heard that right. You're part of that Black tradition, and he knew that that it was important for messages in his song to speak to reality and to be authentic, and that would have included speaking to Black life. And so him being such a prolific songwriter, and because of his fascinating artistry and his life experiences, I believe that they're all helpful in better understanding race and racial oppression in America, particularly during the 1990s. Um, and then I'll try to give you all two quick examples of how, if that's needed for us to understand how, right, exactly Prince is um, artistry, his lyrics, he is in a Black intellectual thought tradition. So this is the Phyllis Wheatley. She's considered the first person of African descent to have her works published, and that happened in 1773. And just as a quick note, because to show how her legacy continued on and how it also was part of Prince's life, is that in Minneapolis, the Phyllis Wheatley Settlement House was established in 1924 for young Black women who were attending the University of Minnesota. But due to racism and laws of segregation, these women were not allowed to live in the dorms. So the Phyllis Wheatley House began as housing for them, and it quickly became such an integral part of the community, and more largely serving the community in other capacities in the 40s and 50s. The house had become much more. And it was actually where Prince's dad, John L. Nelson, and his band played, and where he met Prince's mother. And the community center still exists, not in the same place, but it still is part of the Northside community in Minneapolis. But nevertheless, in Wheatley's first publication, she wrote the poem on being brought to Africa, to America. She remarks on the racist ways that Black people, Black skin, are viewed. We see Prince doing something similar in Race, where he directly calls out how segregationists would view his band, which is a colorful sight and not in a positive way. Moving on to another prominent figure in Black intellectual thought, we have Frederick Douglass. And so in the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, he writes, "I didn't know I was a slave until I couldn't do the things I wanted." Sound familiar? In his memoir, Douglass describes how he attempted to escape slavery several times, and once it was achieved, he changed his name. Does that sound familiar? Douglass poetically states anguish and grief, like darkness and rain, may be depicted, but gladness and joy, like the rainbow, defy the skill of pen or pencil. On the Come album, Prince makes several references to rain as his darkness, even when there is no rain. On Dark, he sings, "Inside, looking out my window, I don't see nothing but rain. Sun up in the sky just a shining. Still I'm lost in my shadow of pain." On Race, we can place him inside this darkness and a similar anguish and grief that Frederick Douglass describes. We know this because Prince begins the song Race with this segment of the poem: "Lie down, fair one, and come away, till the rain is over and gone. It is still raining, it is still dark." In this lie down state, he is contemplating, he is facing the music. Through memoirs, poetry, speeches, letters, sermons, songs, and dance and rebellion, enslaved Africans resisted. They demanded their freedom and the humanization of Black life. This is what Prince is doing at this time. This is the tradition. Now, more specifically, we're going to turn to Black intellectual thought in education, where there's a legacy of Black people advocating for social change through education. They have done this through Black visions, which Michael C. Dawson refers to as philosophies that help define the social realities of African Americans, while also mapping a course of action for social change. Black intellectuals have emphasized education as a means to improve social and economic conditions for Black people. However, they have not all agreed on what this education should look like. For example, there have been persisting questions and debates of what the curriculum for Black children should include. For those who take a critical approach to education and social justice, they are concerned with how power and domination create structural inequalities, and they challenge the absence of African American history and inaccurate representations of the past and present. So in turning to the last two verses of Race, I'd like to directly address where Prince's lyrics converge and diverge from this Black intellectual thought in education, and what are the implications. In verse 2 of Race, Prince mentions a black lady who is a caregiver to a little white girl. He alludes to explicitly taught racism by mothers and kids at school being a barrier to the two relationship, or the relationship shared between the two. He theorizes that she is better off if no one ever explicitly taught her white supremacy. He questions if no one teaches us, how would we know? Now, before I move on, I want to note how these lines always made me think of the movie Karina Karina, which was released August 12th of 1994, which was 4 days before Come. Now, those close dates make it perhaps unlikely that Prince was aware of this movie, but then maybe not, because I also know that some of the Steels worked on the soundtrack for this movie. So I'm just curious out there, are there any connections that people know about? So to answer Prince, how would they know, whether explicitly or implicitly, children learn about race and racism through socialization. If we look at this chart from the Children's Community School, we see that at 3 months, babies look more at faces that match the race of their caregivers. By 30 months, children use race as a factor in choosing playmates. And by 5, while Black and Latinx children show no preference toward their own groups compared to whites, white children this age are strongly biased in favor of whiteness. And by kindergarten, children generally exhibit the racial attitudes that adults hold, and they associate some groups with higher status than others. However, conversations with young children ages 5 to 7 have been shown to improve racial attitudes in as little as a week. So again, not addressing it. Moving on to verse 3 of Race, Prince furthers how focusing on teaching or knowing history is what is causing divisions between races. He also offers an individualistic approach by focusing on being the best example for children to imitate. Is this a colorblind approach? Maybe. Again, I hope that those parts were covered during Camila's talk, but hopefully maybe during Q&A we can go into it a little bit more. But I do want to mention a quote from James Baldwin's If Beale Street Could Talk. He writes, "Neither love nor terror makes one blind. Indifference makes one blind." It's clear that Prince is not indifferent, and he is expressing concern for our future, and for children's future. However, in the tradition of Black intellectual thought and education, miseducation must be addressed. Carter G. Woodson in the 1930s called out educational programs for not teaching about the political and social challenges that children were sure to face. We continue to draw on Woodson and other critical Black scholars who have advocated and still advocate for a more critical approach to Black education so that children may name how power and domination operate in society and be prepared to enact political and social change. We still haven't reached a point where children can learn about themselves, their histories, and deeply engage with how it explains what they are currently experiencing and what may be possible. As an educator, it is a constant challenge to teach about race, racism, and the histories that will support children's critical identity meaning making and understanding of the world. Let me show you how difficult it is to teach accurate and representative histories in schools from a legal standpoint, and how Prince's vision of Down with History is more reality than a vision. Since the early part of this decade, critical race theory has come under attack. From UCLA's Tracking the Attacking on Critical Race Theory in 2023, we learned that 40% of anti-race theory measures mimic language in Trump's executive order. Anti-critical race theory measures have been introduced in 49 states. 90% of all measures and 94% of all enacted measures target K-12 education. Of the measures targeting K-12 education, 73% regulate classroom teaching and 75% regulate curricular materials. Of the measures introduced by state legislators, 1 out of 3 include enforcement provisions that would withhold funding from school districts as a consequence for violations. UCLA also reports that measures to block critical race theory affect about half of U.S. Children. So I repeat, and then let's add a number to that, right? That's about 50.8 million public school students. So I repeat, Prince's Down with History is more reality than a vision. As critical race theory attacks are occurring, so are bans on books, particularly books that teach about race and gender. Data from PEN America's Index of School Book Bans show a surge in book bans. So this map is showing you, how many book bans exist in each state. And I would say that there are only 7 states that are without book bans, and those with them can range from one book being banned all the way to 6,000 books being banned. Teaching history, teaching and having conversations about race and racism in the U.S. is a constant battle. And in the true tradition of Black intellectual thought, it is important for children to know about where they came from, the struggles and triumphs, to not be left to think ahistorically or without context. And so in true Prince fashion, I don't want to leave you without hope for a kid. Last year, Minnesota passed legislation that mandates that ethnic studies instruction be started in high schools, or it's mandated in high schools starting in 2026. And it should move into elementary schools the following year in elementary and middle schools. So there is some hope with ethnic studies being taught in the curriculum. But my point is ahistorical education that takes an individualistic approach will not support children in building collective racial consciousness that allows them to do just as Prince did, name racism and take action against it. Yes, we are all human, but structural racism has created hierarchies, and there are persisting inequities along racial lines. I appreciate this quote from Jeffrey Lamar Coleman, who states that Prince is one of the few African-American artists of the 20th century who unapologetically subverted racist and sexist practices in the music industry and in American culture by problematizing his own racial and sexual identities and simultaneously leaving himself open to accusations of producing racist and sexist lyrics and images. Well, of course, there is hope for the kid. And while I don't find the lyrics of race racist, as an educator, I do find them problematic, but not emblematic of Prince's political or racial consciousness. It's clear from Prince's previous actions, lyrics, and work, for example, and for lyrics that came even after the Come album and as immediate as We March on the Goat experience. Prince is aware of the contributions of his ancestors and the racial and economic inequities facing Black communities. And so this doesn't exactly wrap us up quite yet. Recall the lines, lie down, fair one, and come away till the rain is over and gone. Prince is in the darkness. He is in a contemplative state, facing the music, facing reality, facing racism. I would argue that he's fatigued here. He's experiencing what William Smith coined the inevitable racial battle fatigue. Racial battle fatigue is the cumulative result of a natural race-related stress response to distressing mental and emotional conditions. These conditions emerge from constantly facing racially dismissive, demeaning, insensitive, and/or hostile racial environments and individuals. But in this battle, though fatigued, Prince is not a victim. Prince is what he's been brought up to be in the historical context that the civil rights and Black Power movements provided. He knows how to identify and push back against racial oppression. In Baldwin's essay, The Devil Finds Work, we can better understand why race is a song worth analyzing in spite of its ahistorical orientation. Baldwin wrote, "The victim who is able to articulate the situation of the victim has ceased to be a victim. He or she has become a threat." As a Black man in America, Prince inevitably experienced racism. As has been illustrated through the tradition of Black intellectual thought, it is important for Black people to express their experiences with racial oppression. Why? Because this resistance revitalizes their humanity. It keeps them from being a victim. Prince declaring "my name is not Prince," and my name damn show ain't Victor is more importantly saying, I stand with my ancestors. My name damn show ain't victim. Thank you.